So how in the world do you even begin to describe a being that's infinite? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into a theological framework that tries to do just that by breaking down the very nature of God into attributes we can actually wrap our heads around.
It all really boils down to this one massive question. It's a question humanity has wrestled with for, well, forever, right? And for believers, trying to find an answer is a huge part of their faith.
And hey, this is not just some abstract philosophical thing we're doing here. The sources we're digging into really stress that truly grappling with God's character, well, that's an essential part of the journey of faith itself. So how can our finite minds even begin to comprehend an infinite being? The way we're going to tackle this is by organizing God's character into what are called divine attributes. These are specific qualities that help make the infinite, well, a little more understandable.
All right, pay attention to this slide, because this is basically the roadmap for everything we're about to cover. The attributes get split into two huge categories. On one side, you've got non-communicable attributes, things found only in God, and on the other, you have communicable attributes, things that in some way we can also see in ourselves.
So first up, let's jump into what makes God completely and totally unique. I'm talking about the qualities that have zero parallel, no equal anywhere in all of creation.
Okay, first on the list is something called self-existence, or aseity if you want the fancy term. Seriously, think about it. Everything we know, a star, a tree, you, me, we all depend on something else to exist. But God? Nope. The idea here is that God is the uncaused cause, the ultimate source of his own being, intellectually, powerfully, in every way imaginable.
All right, next up we have immutability. And that's just a big word for unchanging. We live in a world where everything is constantly changing, right? So this idea of an absolute anchor, it's a big deal. It means God's character, his purpose, his promises, they're set in stone. No mood swings, no changing his mind.
And then, of course, there's infinity. And this one is pretty straightforward. It just means God is completely free from any and all limitations. Theologians usually break this down into three key areas. First, God is infinite in his very essence. You could say perfect. Second, God is infinite in time, which we call eternity. And third, God is infinite in space, meaning he's not bound by any physical location.
And what's so cool here is how all these attributes start to stack on top of each other. Because God is infinite, it just makes sense that he's also unique. There can only be one, right? And that same infinity means he has to be omnipresent, everywhere at once. And it also implies he's omniscient, or all-knowing, and omnipotent, all-powerful. You see how it works? Together they just paint this picture of a being with absolutely no limits.
Okay, so we've just talked about these huge, almost mysterious concepts. Now let's switch gears and move to something a little more relatable. We're going from the qualities that set God apart to the ones that, in some way, God actually shares with us.
And this is the absolute key, the crucial distinction you have to get. So while we might see a spark of something like love or justice in ourselves, the difference is just massive. It's all about perfection. Our version is flawed, it's limited, but God's is perfect and infinite. So, the source material we're looking at groups these shared attributes into 5 big buckets. They're spiritual, intellectual, moral, sovereign, and blessed. We're going to touch on a few of these, and we'll start with the intellectual ones.
So when we talk about intellectual attributes, we're talking about God having this perfect self-awareness, a flawless grasp of everything. And get this, it's not just everything that is, but everything that could possibly be. And it's not just about being a trivia champion, right? It includes wisdom, knowing how to perfectly apply all that knowledge, and truthfulness, meaning God is the very standard of what's real and true.
Oh, I really like this slide. It does such a great job of breaking down the two sides of God's moral perfection, or holiness. So on one side, you have majestic holiness. That's all about God being completely separate, awe-inspiringly different from creation. But then you have ethical holiness, which is about being morally pure, totally incompatible with sin.
And building right on top of that moral perfection is the idea of righteousness. You can kind of think of this as God's holiness in action. It's about the perfect principles and laws that God uses to govern the universe and to carry out perfect justice. And yeah, that includes both rewards and punishments.
Okay, this table is super helpful because goodness is such a huge concept, right? This breaks it down so we can see how it plays out in different ways. So you've got benevolence, which is like a general kindness to everything.
Then love, which is more specific care for people. Grace is that unearned favor for sinners. Mercy is the compassion for those who are suffering. And finally, patience, which is that forbearance even when people keep messing up.
And one last big one in this shared category is sovereignty. This one's also broken into two parts that are totally connected. First, there's the sovereign will. That's God's authority to decide what happens. But then, and this is key, there's the sovereign power, which is the actual ability to do it. So it's not just having the ultimate authority, it's having the ultimate ability to back it up.
All right, we've gone through a lot of categories and definitions here. The non-communicable, the communicable. So let's just zoom out for a second and ask the big question, why does any of this matter? What's the point?
And really, it all comes down to this beautiful tension at the heart of the whole thing. You see, on one hand, all those non-communicable attributes, things like self-existence, infinity, they show us a God who is transcendent, totally other, way beyond what we can fully get our minds around. But then you have the communicable attributes, like love and goodness and mercy. And they show us a God who is also immanent, who is personal, who we can actually relate to and know.
And that brings us to the final, really mind-bending question that this whole framework leaves us with. What does it actually mean for a being who is perfect, unchanging, and literally infinite to choose to have a relationship with someone who is imperfect and finite, like us? And thinking about that intersection, where the all-powerful meets the all-loving, where the infinite meets the personal, that's really what this whole theological exploration is all about. Thanks so much for digging into this with us.